We were joking that I might have the hardest role here right now because I'll probably have to rein them in, right? They're going to have lots to say, I think. We've got such a great group here. And the only reason we'd rein them in is because of time, nothing else. All righty, so we want to hear from some practitioners today, and that's what I love about panel discussions is we actually are going to ask some questions of some panelists. I have some questions to start us off, but we want it to be interactive, so if you have questions for them, if you can let us know. If it's directed to one person or to the group, that's fine too. So we'll just go with the flow and see how this goes. So I'm going to start with my first question. And as we said, we've had a good morning of discussions about, you know, the culture, the wellness piece, really trying to build some good practices in or tweak our practices. So my first question is about what kinds of initiatives or strategies the panelists have used to build relationships. So what have they done to intentionally work on that piece that we've heard so much about today? When Gail talked about the connections, the sense of belonging that we have, it feeds into those culture builders around relationships as well. And we want to be based on evidence. We want our work to be really, you know, thinking about how do we know we need to do that and how do we know it's working. So I guess I'll add that to the question. What have you done to intentionally work on the relationship piece? And then how did you know it was needed? And perhaps how do you know that what you've taken as steps is working? So, does anybody want to start us off or should I just?
You pick.
I'll pick, all right. Lori, I'm picking you since you spoke up.
Okay, so I'm going to take a couple of minutes and talk about something that we've developed or is developing here at Rocky View Schools around our Indigenous Advisory Committee. So this doesn't necessarily have a lot to do with a relationship that was damaged because of COVID. However, it did not get, those relationships did not receive the attention that they needed even prior to COVID. And so coming out of that, we decided that that was probably a good opportunity. So our Indigenous Advisory Committee circle, consists of 2 trustees, the superintendent, myself, the director, myself and our director of Indigenous Learning. And most importantly, it includes representatives from Tsuut'ina Nation, from Minithni, which is more commonly known as the Stoney Nakoda Nation, Métis Nation number 3, and we are working to engage Siksika Nation as part of that committee. And so the purpose of that advisory circle is to find ways that we can come together around student learning and student focus. It's not about agreements between us and our partners. It's not about transportation. It's not about finances. It is truly about enhancing the student experience for everyone. And so the advisory circle is quite purposeful. It's intentional. We've had 3 meetings so far, and the only I shouldn't say only, but the sole purpose of those 3 meetings, the time that we've spent together, has been around listening and learning, and that's it. That's where we start. That's the relationship that has to be built. We are definitely approaching the situation with a humble and open heart, with a mind that is willing to listen and to learn. And so that's really been a focus here. The evidence that we have that it's working is that people have come back each meeting, and they have felt comfortable and open to share, provide lessons, and in a way that is inclusive of everybody in the room, and will, in the end, pay major dividends for everybody in ensuring that the students have success no matter where they attend school. And build relationships that are so critical for us these days.
Thank you, Lori. Thanks so much. Anybody want to ask Lori anything about that? Any questions right now? No? All right. David, would you like to share your thoughts around that question as well?
Sure. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. In terms of data, I'm going to start with that. So data from our school trustees, from our school councils, from principals and teachers, in alignment with the education plan and the priorities flowing out of that. We have in CBE a school support model, came in about 5 years ago. And so we have basically two education directors in every area. Half of the schools in an area are divided between those directors to visit on a regular basis. And we have leadership meetings, of course, on a monthly basis with principals and assistant principals. We also then have a central portfolio. And that's how we've approached this work. And so sitting down regularly with principals and hearing, the stories and the conversations and going into classrooms as part of the school visit is a walk around and visiting classrooms and actually helping and supporting the administration, observing a lesson and providing feedback for the teacher. It's down to those levels. And so, of course, coming out of the pandemic, anxiety was high, relationships, people felt isolated. So there was lots of indicators there. And just moving and bringing back some of those practices where, and I'll include staff here as well, because it's not just for the students. And as we've heard this morning, it's been incredible. So things like common meals again, a soup Friday, creating that kind of a list. Principals being able to order in a little bit of dinner. And this last Thursday, we had a lot of teacher conferences, and during we entered a stage there where under public scrutiny with public funds, we didn't do that. We didn't allow that. And now that's opening back up again, and the difference that makes in terms of that staff well-being, and then staff in turn being able to create those welcoming, caring, safe, and respectful spaces for students to come in for those relationships. So again, it's the data from our school survey. We just got that recently, being able to look at that, compare that against our last year's data, other schools across Canada is helpful. It's not helpful to know that we're at, let's say, the Canadian average for students experiencing anxiety, and there's 31%. Doesn't really give us a lot of reassurance. It tells us about the work we still have to do. So it's in progress.
I love that you, thank you. I love that you see the need to be in the classrooms. And, that can feel threatening to teachers sometimes when they think of classroom visits as, I always like to think, what's the difference between observation and evaluation? So the more times we're there, the more times teachers see it as more comfortable, I think, that we're coming and going.
Well, and actually we worked through the ATA on that one, as you can imagine, when we first threw that out there to the system, and we had what we called the 4 core look-fors, and we built that on that. And that was a situation where it was an invitation for principals to invite staffs into saying, hey, when we come into your classroom, what would you like feedback on? And that is aligned with, again, your ed plan and your school development plan goals. So again, we have literacy, math, and well-being, and that was a new thing. Until 5 years ago, well-being was never a requirement to have a well-being goal. So even just having that surfaced in terms of, hey, we want to formalize, how are we building those relationships? And of course, things we've talked about this morning are things that resurface in each and every conversation we have. So it's not we put that in place and so we're good. It's always ongoing.
Thank you. I think that's the biggest takeaway too, is that we're never finished the work, so it's not a one and done. You don't do that have dinner one day for staff and think that fixed everything at that building. Jonathan, would you like to add to this question?
Sure. Yeah, I can definitely. So basically, when I started with Tsuut'ina Nation, one of the biggest themes, that came about in talking to staff and, talking to, parents, stakeholders, the board of trustees, was alignment. So we have 4 schools within our system, and each of those schools has and had their own education plan. So for me, one of the biggest things was to take the themes within those plans and align them within our own education plan for our department. So what we did was we engaged our board of trustees. First of all, got the direction from them, and then looked at engaging all staff within, what are some areas that what are some solutions to address some of the challenges that we're facing? So we did that with all the staff within our department on May 19th. And it was a full day of just gathering insight and perspective and solutions. And the next phase of that, was taking some of that data and then, just looking at themes and theming them into 6 strategic priorities, in no particular order, but one of them was staff development, student success, creating a caring, welcoming environment, language and culture, and, operational, there were 6 areas. I can't remember the other 2 off heart. However, the next phase of that, like I mentioned, was engaging parents in that. So we had a parent engagement session on October 19th, where we invited parents from the nation to come in and give us some feedback into this plan. We didn't get as many people out as we had hoped for, but, again, one of the biggest themes in there was, solution-based. How can we, what are some solutions that you have for the education department, to help us meet our goals? Again, taking that feedback and rolling it into the strategic plan. It's a 10-year strategic plan, and we almost have the first draft of it, so that's going to allow us to set that vision. It's going to allow everyone to be aligned and come together and measure how we meet these goals, within a 10-year time frame. So that's I'm really excited for that, to unveil it and have the Board of Trustees approve it and have it, for use for implementation. So.
Then it gets legs, right? Then it becomes a living document once you get it out there.
Exactly, and really it's something that all of us can, whether, no matter what your role is, whether that's a teacher, a parent, an EA, a principal, director of learning, we can all reflect on this plan and come together and say, this is our plan for education. And, we can always come back to the drawing board and look at, how are we meeting our goals? And one of the things that will tell us how we're meeting our goals is the Our School survey data. So, and we're looking at utilizing other data points to help us measure success.
Awesome. Did you all notice something he said right at the very beginning? The date. Did you pick up on that? What was the date they met?
May 19th.
May 19th. Like Jonathan knows it was May 19th. That's how significant that day would have been, right? That you knew right off the bat that May 19th was the day you had that meeting. And that, to me, that means that's an intentional day that you picked to listen to people and to have that discussion. And it's the driving force now, obviously, behind what you're doing. So that's pretty cool. Mike?
Well, it's all about relationships, and coming out of COVID, the divisiveness in the communities between, for school leaders and for staff, and moving away from collaboration during that time certainly put some great challenges on the system, and definitely doing some of the things that were talked about earlier by some of our panelists by checking in and walking through. But one of the things we did, we got our leaders together and we did a retreat and we started looking at our data and deconstructing it and having them go back to their staff and to break down what are the three biggest areas for their wellness, for their support. And 3 themes came up. 1 was personal growth, 2 was psychological protection, and then 3 was work-life management. And so from there, we started to have conversations because a student learning need is a professional learning need for staff, is a school learning need for the school, and then it's also a system. What structures do you need in the system? And that became some of our guiding force. How do we break down some of those pieces? How do we get alignment? And how do we collaborate in a more meaningful way? And it was different for different employee groups. So one of the things we decided to do from that was we rejigged our budget and we did 4 professional learning days for educational assistants. And because that was a big part of the message that we had from them. We were having kids who were not regularly in attendance, an increase in complex needs, and there became a whole series of a number of issues, and our educational assistants didn't feel they had the skills. But we just didn't plan 4 days for them throughout the year. We did some reflection after the first one, and we got feedback, and we started to tailor based upon what some of their needs were. And then we started to have conversations with our principals about how do we need to do things as learners so that there's some consistency between schools, because all our staff talk, and we want to start building that collaborative spirit and start building that coherence because that professional learning was most important. We all know that all our staff want to do good work, and all our staff go into work thinking we're going to do what's best for students. But coming out of COVID, staff was more kind of divided and on their own, which has a huge impact on their well-being. So that was a starting point, and I'll stop there because I could probably talk for too long.
Reg, last but not least, and we'll open the floor for questions on this topic.
And I know Mike, and he's right. I'll start from a personal perspective first when we talk about rebuilding relationships. And the first thing after I read the question, thought about it, I wrote down the word apologize. And I learned this early on in my career, and it was mentioned this morning, how do you become vulnerable? I didn't know I was being vulnerable, but I started teaching, and 6 years later, I was sitting in front of that staff as their principal. And of course, I thought as a new young leader that I had to have all the answers. And I remember making some decisions and then thinking about the staff meeting coming up, realizing that that wasn't a good decision. It was probably an error. And so I began the staff meeting by simply saying to staff, I'm sorry, but I think I screwed this up. So we're going to have to fix it. And what I found out is that they forgave me, and then we worked collaboratively at solving it. And that changed a whole lot of things for me in the relationship there, that actually taught me something as a new leader about maybe don't make decisions as hurried as you think you need to make them. Listen to those around you, collect the data, collect the conversation, collect the opinions, and move forward. And the other thing that I heard this morning that I wrote down while I was listening to Gail is I've also discovered that I always have to be ready and willing to hear and listen to that which is difficult and unwanted. The criticism of you and your leadership or decision, the criticism of the decision that you as a school division have made, and there in that moment is a chance to rebuild, to fix. And it always comes on the day that you're the most tired. It always comes on the day that you are the least ready for it and the most vulnerable in terms of responding in an emotional way. And message to self, shut up and listen. And ask questions. And that's the other thing that I've found out is ask questions. Don't stop asking questions. Ask clarifying questions so that you understand it. And the other thing about the apology is that I wrote down, catch it before it spreads. Today with social media, stuff goes out there that is so untrue and people buy into it like a Black Friday deal. And it just surprises me at if it's online and somebody said it, it must be true. Like it boggles the mind. But so get to the source and work at rebuilding and fixing it, because usually when that goes out on social media, somebody's angry. And so, and then finally, coming out of the pandemic, where we, as a school division, we have 16 education agreements with First Nation communities in Manitoba, and there's a long history to that, and I won't go into that. And then we have a whole bunch of reciprocal agreements with other First Nation communities. 85% of our school division is Indigenous. In terms of our student population. But coming out of the pandemic, we have to find ourselves again. And so it is a rebuilding of relationships because First Nation communities in Manitoba shut down. Like I had to get permission to drive into a First Nation community. And I remember an elder saying to me, Reg, just walk through our cemetery and you'll see how many people died in 1919, 1918, or whenever the plague was at that time. And so they closed it down. In fact, one of our largest communities made quadrants, and you couldn't go shopping if you weren't from that quadrant on those days unless you were assigned, simply to try to stop the spread of the pandemic. Nobody came to school. Our schools were empty on month-by-month basis. We tried to do online learning. Or deliver homework packages. Of course, you all know how well that must have gone. And so now we're 2 years behind, and so we're coming out of this pandemic trying to rebuild these relationships, trying to get kids back to school, trying to improve the attendance, which is now worse than it was before we went in, and meeting with chief and council. Along with that is this new sense of our own governance that is coming into our First Nation relationships. And so that's phenomenal, taking over our schools and wanting more say in the education. And so that's what we're working with. And so now we're in the process. I got an email this morning from somebody who says we wanted to sit down, and we've had ongoing conversations in the relationship about changing that education agreement. What's it going to look like going forward? So that's a relationship that we're rebuilding. We're redefining as to how that's going to look. And it's a lot of work, but it's actually quite exciting about where we're going to go with that. So, yeah. When Gail was speaking this morning and she said, you got to ask 3 people. I said, no, I don't. I just have to ask my wife and she'll tell me. And she has often reminded me, and it's good for all of us. You say things with such passion sometimes that you shut down conversations. I did once respond to her flippantly and say, but if I'm right, why do we need to continue talking about it? No, wrong answer. Okay. Anyways,
Thank you, Reg.
that's what I've learned. Listen and ask questions.
There's a
And
real
apologize.
listening theme here.
There is a listening theme, isn't there? I've put down the words that I've heard over and over again, listening certainly coming up. Any questions? Carlos, do you have a question online? Do you have questions on the floor? You have 5 experts here, so please ask some questions. If you've got a situation you're dealing with, they might have some great advice, something around the lines of this piece.
Yes, from the online group, Tracy, 2 comments. Number 1, apologies by leaders can be really restorative to staff. It's a good reminder. I see a lot of leaders who think that apologizing means admitting weakness, and it doesn't have to be. We are all human. Number 2, it says that's a great reminder, especially about social media. Not responding is also a response. Getting to the source allows you to have some control over how it's presented. Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you. Yes.
A couple of you have mentioned, so speaking of rebuilding, a couple of you have mentioned the step before that. Sometimes that trust is broken, and getting to the rebuilding is actually way far off. People not showing up at meetings, people not showing up after the pandemic's over, things like that. Any advice on where to start before rebuilding, how to rebuild that trust, or actually even start that conversation on rebuilding that trust?
I'll say this. I guess I would suggest that whoever takes responsibility for starting that rebuilding needs to go face to face. If they're going to come to a meeting, great, but if you're not sure, don't call a meeting and expect them to come. I would say go sit down with them. And, same theme is going to occur. What's wrong? And listen. What are you thinking? Where are we at? What do we need to change? I've forgotten the author. She said, if you can't solve the problem, you don't have enough people in the circle. She says you need to add more people to the conversation if you can't solve it. And so I really believe that you need to go and have a conversation and invite them to invite those that they think might add to the conversation, and you do the same. And so that's some of what we've done in the work that we've done with our First Nation communities. And I've learned lots in the last 9 years. And one more comment. I used to be a principal of a private Mennonite high school, and Christian perspective, and but I got to say this. In my meetings with First Nation communities, I pray more than I did when I was the principal of a Christian Mennonite high school. And I found that fascinating, just fascinating. And it's taught me a great deal. And you have to add, if for us, if it's a First Nation community, we have to add the wisdom of our elders. And they may not be there at the first meeting, but they need to be there. And yeah, so I think go make a face-to-face. Start there. Start simple. Start small. And expect the process and the journey to weave in many unexpected ways as you work together too. Yeah.
I may just add a little. It depends on who the group is. And I think that's a big part. I think the first thing, if it's parents, that's a little more challenging, but it's still doable. Who do you need to reach out to, and how do you really listen? So if you think they're wrong, and they're getting agitated, and you're getting lost in the noise of the agitation, you're never going to find out what's really making them nervous. So it takes a lot of skill to think about to listening and what the real problem is, and to always be giving a hopeful, positive message. So and if it's an employee group, then it's the same type of thing. How do you get out and how do you make connections? How do you talk? How do you let them listen without judgment, so that you're not going to say you're wrong and I'm right? Because if you go in with that mindset, you never really get to a solution. And I think it's really about thinking about what are the next steps and what's the communication going to be. You have to be very clear in what we're here for and what we're doing and why, and let those voices come out so that you can actually make a difference. Because it's not beneficial to our communities if our parents or a group of our parents are angry with the schools and don't want to come in, and we shut them out. Because their children go to school every day. We have to find ways to do it, and it's very hard. And so if you're a school principal, then you need a lot of support from your leadership team to coach you through that. Don't get lost in the noise. This is a long-term game, it's not a short-term piece. So I'd say that's probably the most challenging thing coming out, and we see a lot of it in a number of different areas right now in Alberta.
It's hard not to let personal feelings get in the way, right?
Yeah. And I think that's where it comes from. When I'm meeting with school leaders or my system leader team, it's giving them the courage and the confidence that you don't have to worry if people are upset about things. What is the moral imperative? What are the things that we have to deal with? How do we start communicating, and how do we build that bridge? Because it's about building a stronger community. It's not about who's right and who's wrong, it's understanding. And often understanding is often from a little ignorance on what actually is really happening, and you have to put in that extra effort. The extra effort gets you to a more successful resolution. And it's hard. I feel really hard, feel really challenging for some of our school leaders because they have a hard job right now.
Jonathan's going to add to that.
Yeah.
Very short and simple, but I often reflect on this one saying that was said to me. The only way that you know if you can trust someone is to trust them. And it's really, again, I reflect back on when I started this role. It was really just trusting people and leading with an open heart, showing them who I am. Going back to that transparency piece, letting people know where I am, know that I'm here today, that what I do is it's no secret. It's serving students, it's serving staff, it's serving principals. And it's really adding on to that point is leading with yes. Really, I remember, again, the first time I said yes to one of our staff members, they were like, really? And I'm like, yes. Just tell me a plan and what does this look like? And tell me a plan and we can make it happen. And it's really creating, again, that helps create that trust, right? So when you need something, it's reciprocated.
I think going into everything with positive intent, right? Sometimes that's challenging because we get our backs up too. We're human, and how do we take that emotion out? I struggled with that for a long time in leadership because I would, want to fix something, get it done. I don't understand why this is still a problem. And I had to learn to really look at the evidence. What is the facts of the matter telling me? This is what we're going to focus on in the discussion, and I'm going in with positive intent that we can make this work. And I think, it's Stephen Covey's, right? Win-win. We go in with that thinking I'm going to win something, they're going to win something. It's not about I'm just going to win. And really trying to seek to understand, but the trust has to be built. There's no question. Anything else for that question, or
Yeah,
David?
I'd just like to add, love the question, agree with everything that's been shared in response, and I would add also, it starts with that listening that we've heard before, and I think it can start with a question, and a question about how are you? I read an article once about levels of leadership, and that was the highest question to lead at that highest level, and not the flippant, hey, how are you? It's really taking time to actually, and part of listening is not that, yes, we've listened, how do we know? It's when the other person feels they've been heard. Not that, because a lot of our listening is preparing for my next response to your question. And to come out of that space, and that's where the mindfulness piece comes in, and just coming into the moment, letting go of all that. I don't need to think about my answer right now. I first of all just want to hear your question and find out where you are. And that other saying, I think it was Maya Angelou that said, you know, our kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And we all know that, and we kind of fly past that and say, yeah. And it's the same with the adults and whoever we're trying to rebuild that trust with. And so creating that space, opportunity, love the face-to-face, and those things that really build those strong relationships as well.
Good. Thank you. Awesome, thank you. All right, so I want to ask these fine 5 experts how they kind of stay on top of things. So one of the things that I know about leadership is that we all want to impact everything. So we get into situations and, you know, it's how many things in one day can I impact? How many things can I used to go into work with a list of things, and some days I never even looked at the list. So how do you manage your time so you can stay focused on priorities that you know that makes the difference? Those are the things you're really going to have impact. And what evidence, you know, both ways, I guess, what evidence do you know what it is you should work on, and what's the evidence of that that's actually working? Do you have any thoughts on that? Mike, I'm looking right at you, made eye contact,
Okay.
so there you go.
Yeah. I think you have to really trust the people you work with, and you have to build a really collaborative environment, and you have to be knowledgeable and aware of what they're doing, what they're working on, and where they need help. But you have to get out of their way. You have to empower your people. So it's asking good questions, it's following up with them, it's trusting that they're going to do the work, and that it's important that the message is always, we're in this together. So when you're dealing with complex things, so anytime you get a chance to speak to your staff, we're better together. It's hard to go alone. Our challenges are too complex. We need to work together, we need to build trust, we need to listen to each other, every voice matters, and we have to do it together. And I think that's the critical part. I mean, when I looked at my November schedule, I didn't have a free minute in it, so my secretary said to me, when are you going to do your work? All the evenings and the weekends. And I think that's where you have to really know where you have to spend your time. And that's where you listen to your people, listen to your community, and then strategically place yourself.
So I could build on that a little bit.
Awesome, thank you, Lori.
The piece around taking the time to listen, one of the things that I noticed coming from a smaller division to a much larger division is I don't know anybody here. And so although there are times when you think, wow, I could just make a decision and we could just move ahead, that doesn't pay off in the long run. So being very purposeful about trying to build some relationships. One example would be that we bring together what we call the high school assessment working group. So if you've worked in education ever and you say the word assessment, everyone sort of, you know, there's so much ownership over assessment. So every month-ish, we have every high school administrator come and bring one teacher with them. And it's the same pair that comes every time. And the sole purpose of our afternoon together is to talk about assessment practices at the high school level and allow them to provide guidance to me, to us, to determine where we need to go next with those practices in order to ensure that we continue down that student-centered approach with modern practices and all of those kinds of things. So I was really proud of them. At the end of the year last year, they had developed, it's AP 223 on student reassessment. So we now have a reassessment administrative procedure within our school division that was developed by that group of people. Myself and one of my team could have sat down at a table and just written that and said, there it is, let's go for it. But taking that time and trying to engage with people one-on-one as much as you can while they're there and available during that workday, I think is the most critical. It's easy to fill up your schedule with a lot of meetings, and those are important pieces of our work. But connecting with those teachers one-to-one, the next working group that we're going to have is around communication of, we call it COSL, communication of student learning. So again, I'll have an administrator and a teacher from a number of schools come together to provide guidance to us on what that can and should look like within Rocky View schools. So that constant relationship attention is what eventually will move those pieces forward in the division.
And Lori, I'm hearing that you are choosing which of those pieces you're sitting in on, which pieces you
Yep.
are directing
Yep.
kind of that work to go forward. So you're strategically, intentionally deciding where you're going to spend your time.
Yes.
You can't do it all. You can't be in every meeting. You can't be with every person. David?
Sure, we talked a little bit about data, and I think the next piece is structures and processes. So how do we get our work done, not just me personally or individually, but across the system? And we have put in place a student well-being framework. And so that, again, comes out of our ed plan. And that framework is a guide for all of our staff around what priorities to be working on in terms of their well-being goal. And we have a companion guide to go with that to support with practical resources. So having a structure there. I think the other piece is resources, as mentioned. And so for me, how do I get my work done? I have a team. So Danielle is our assistant principal for well-being, and one of our specialists, Chris, is here as well. Our second one, Kate, couldn't be here today, but I have a team, and it's not delegated leadership. We're moving away from that concept. It's shared leadership. So I say that in a little bit joking, but we have lots of conversation about the work and how we're going to take that up and who's going to do what. But it's never here. Just take care of that. I think in terms of resources as well, I see Nanette from Alberta Health Services at the back. Give us a wave, Nanette. So she's been working with CBE for 18 years. And so our allied health partners in the space, AHS and Everactive Schools, have just been incredible support for helping us actually come up with concrete resources to support schools and our leaders in those resources. So having that framework and that common language allows people to align, their work, and same with our system resources. So we're not, we talk about well-being, but what does that actually mean? So we had to define that as well. What's our common definition? And so that has been proved really helpful. And we're just at the start. We've just recently unveiled that at the end of last year. So more to come.
Thank you, David.
I just wanted to build on that as well with the frameworks. I went to a presentation at CAS, a couple of weeks back. And, I really got thinking of this concept of frameworks and, how does that apply to our context? So when you look at the Alberta Teacher Quality Standard, the work that we've done within our district is contextualizing that to fit, how do we help our teachers grow and develop? And how does that process really be administrator driven? So principal and vice principal driving that, with myself and our director of learning, really keeping that process moving and, just looking at, we're not going to do the work, but we're going to help our administrators do the work. Took that, a step further this year in contextualizing the leadership quality standard. And, how do we, help our principals grow now? Have conversations with them, attend staff meetings, attend assemblies, attend community events, looking at how do we gather evidence to help them grow and develop in their professional growth goals. And then again, helping our board of trustees do that same process for myself with the SLQS. So contextualizing all of those frameworks into what we need and how do we help, our staff grow, I guess, just wanted to chime in with that.
I like that, and I think sometimes we forget to unpack those things, right? So we grab a framework or standards like the leadership standards or the Alberta standards, and do we unpack them and talk about them enough, or do we just adopt it? And I think sometimes we assume everybody reads it the same way.
And really looking at, when you look at standard number 5 within the TQS, it's FNMI, so that's a very broad perspective. And what I mean by contextualizing that is Tsuut'ina ways, Tsuut'ina language, Tsuut'ina culture, Tsuut'ina customs.
Amazing, thank you. Were there any comments, questions, Carlos, online? We're good. Questions for the panel on this, just sort of how do they prioritize, how do they build shared leadership? How do they, put the team around them they need, making sure that they can get at the right work? Anything they can help you with around that? All right, this is a quiet bunch today, Monday bunch. So one of the things I was thinking about that I wanted to ask them about is kind of nudging other people forward. And I remember this morning you had a question, what do you do with the teacher that's not buying in or not on board? So that's a reality, not just with education, I think it's a reality everywhere, but we definitely constantly, as leaders, have to think about growing the other people. How do we grow so we have shared leadership? How do we grow others in our beliefs? How do we help others see that relationships are important, that we do use better strategies when we listen. We do need to apologize sometimes. So you 5 seem to have a great handle on this piece, but how do you help the others in your circle grow as well and kind of nudge them forward? So I'm going to pick on Reg first because I know his system really well, and I know all his people.
I guess I would say that I'm probably not enough. I think that I'm trying to refer to the importance of relationships all the time, building relationships. I've often said I've made 2 mistakes in hiring people in my entire career. And both times I listened to somebody else. And so my belief is that if I think that you can build relationships, I'll hire you. One time, early in my principalship, I had a trustee and the vice principal, and they really wanted this person who had won all kinds of awards at the university in English. Knew his content, really good at it. But I had real doubts about relationship building, but I deferred to them because I trusted them. Mistake. Years later, the principal of the school said to me, "You hired him, right?" He reminded me because he had worked as my vice principal. So I've since then talked about people, I can teach you how to be a teacher. I can teach you how to do your job, but I can't teach you nearly as easily how to build relationships, because that's a gift. That's a gift, and I think you're taught that as a young child in terms of your upbringing. I think you see the people around you, and that's a gift. I'll give you an example. We got a situation right now in our school division where we've got a vice principal who it's blown up, demonstration outside the school, does her job really well, does lots of hard work in terms of her relationships, but so much water's gone under the bridge with regards to her inability to be sensitive at that exact moment when you have to be sensitive with somebody else who's really emotional or caught doing something wrong, particular students. And so it's not going to work out there. It's not going to work out. And to the extent that on a week ago, I chartered a flight and flew up north someplace with 3 of my superintendents, and we met with community and worked at trying to restore the relationship. That's what we had to do. We had to rebuild it. And so we're in that process now. So I think that that's what I do a lot of. I remember as a principal, I took over a school that was dysfunctional. I was invited by the superintendent of the time to apply for the job, and I got the job. Why did I apply? I spent a lot of time talking to staff who came into my room to complain about what was going on in the school, and then what I did was I sent them back to speak to the staff, who they didn't mention, but I knew that they were complaining about. You need to talk to him or her. And I would prep them on the conversation. The hardest part was the follow-up. I would follow up in 24 hours and make sure that they had had the conversation. And if they hadn't, then I would push them again. And if they didn't, then I would go to the other staff and say, you guys got to have a talk. You got to come into my room. And it was a long process. Over the course of 5 years, we spent a lot of time trying to heal relationships that had just splintered apart and drifted away. And they had to start talking to each other again. I read lots of sports books, and I'm into sports, and Greg Popovich has coached the San Antonio Spurs for 26 seasons. And there was a reporter who saw him after a game that they had lost, and the rookie on the team, don't know who it is, had the ball in his hands with the final shot and missed the shot, and they had lost the game. And the first person that Popovich talked to the next day at practice, he walked up to the rookie, put his hand on his shoulder, and talked to him about everything in his life except basketball, just to make sure that he was okay. And I really believe in this world, we have to make deposits in our relationships on a continual basis. And that's not easy because that takes a great deal of time. And so my senior administrative staff, all 10 of them, always approach me and say, I know you're really busy, but, and I think I've said to some people, I never confirm their statement about being busy. Because what I'm doing, if I do that, means that they're going to call me less. And I need them to talk to me. I need them to tell me what's going on. And so in order to build relationships, you have to take the time, and the time is always the wrong time. Never is the right time, and you have to make time. And as Mikey said, you're doing the stuff in the evenings and on the weekends because you're taking the time. And I think that's super important. So I think that's what I would answer.
Lots of modeling, right?
Yeah.
Anybody want to add to that, how you nudge other people along to kind of see the importance of relationships, coaching them, modeling, having a hard conversation with someone who's not good at having their own conversations? What kinds of things come to mind? And then we'll go to questions for the last few minutes.
I think one of the things, you have to honor the people. So if it's a difficult conversation, you have to have a conversation with the leader, and how do you model it? And one of the first questions that I always ask, does the person see it? Do they see the challenge? Because if they don't see it, they're not going to change. And then the second thing is, what have you tried? Because I know when something's not working for me, when I'm working with someone, the first thing I say, well, obviously what I'm doing is not working, so how do I change? How do I reflect? What do I need to do differently? Because most people are good people. And sometimes it's hard for some people to see some things, and your job as a leader is to help people see, because you'll change if you see there's something that needs to change. You won't change if you think the problem is the leader's problem and not your problem. And that's the hard part, and that's the relationship piece. And so I think that's a real key conversation. Instead of having frustration, it becomes personal. You never want conversations to become personal. You want it to be about something specific that you can work together. Anyway, that's my comment.
I would just say, just adding on to that as well, like I have the privilege of working with people who actually probably nudge me towards relationship rebuilding more than I nudge them. But one phrase I've sort of adopted, and I try to keep in mind, and I'll push back to people as well, is, you know, if there's something that's difficult between yourself and another person, and you're saying, well, you know, she's just so difficult to work with, and I don't understand her, we speak different languages, you know, all of those types of things, I try to put the phrase back out there after they're done and say, and I am that too. Because we're all a reflection of each other, right? And so if we can find that common ground, and to recognize that whatever it is that's probably bothering you about that situation or that person, you're actually that too. We're not above or better than, or we're all working towards that common goal, and that's what we have to keep coming back to. Someone said making deposits in the bank. We have to keep making those deposits as often as we can, and then remembering that we are all of those things that are driving us crazy about other people sometimes.
When you know, for me, I guess one of the things is that listening to people speak, you know, an elder once told me, you know, there's a reason why we have more ears than we do, you know, mouths, is because we should do twice as much listening as we do speaking. Ever since I heard that, you know, I've gotten into the habit of asking people, you know, because you have people, they come to see you and they close the door, or it's going to be one of those conversations. And then what I've kind of gotten into the habit of doing or saying or asking them directly is, do you want me to listen right now, or do you want solutions? And then you can just see the relief. You can see it kind of, just a sigh of relief. I just need someone to listen to me right now. Okay, then I can listen, But if you want solutions, I find that, when you're working with administrators and teachers and system leaders, we just want to fix. We want to fix, right? What I mean, that concept of doing more listening than talking. And another thing too is that concept of knowledge is meant to be shared. And so one thing that I found, again, listening to people speak, and when there's a lot of my, I, me kind of language, I challenged our principals last year. I said, let's get into the habit of talking in our language. Our, us, we. Sure enough, the next monthly report that I got from one of our principals was spoken all in our, us, and we language.
Good for him.
Rarely ever was it me or I. So those little things, they make a big difference. And, I always try and, be mindful of the way I'm speaking. When we're talking about children and teachers and schools, it's not just me as the director of education. It's all of our responsibility.
Beautiful, thank you. So I think our time is up. Do we have a question or two before we close this part? You do have experts here. Thank you. Anything?
Just from a member of the online group saying that the keynotes were good and the panel was great. Reg is an inspiring leader, many nuggets of wisdom in his words. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And yeah, people love you and they are very effective. So yeah, that's simple yet very, very effective.
Good. Thank you. Questions, comments for this group before they leave? Well, they're not leaving the room, but they're leaving the stage. All righty, thank you.
Let's have a huge round of applause for